Thank you for coming again to the fourth in this series, which is an exploration of the idea of the city of the future and New York as the definition of the future in the 1920s and into the early 1930s. Of all of these inventors of a modern American architecture, Hood is the one who is both most creative and I think to some extent the most celebrated, but also at the same time the most misunderstood. And I'll argue that it's really through the skyscraper that you can understand Hood's career. Hood had personality in great measure. He was described by all who both enjoyed his company, but and on those who also were skeptical of his talents, as someone who was, and it's the title of the lecture tonight, the brilliant bad boy of New York architecture. Hood was born in 1881, and he died prematurely in 1934, so at the age of 53, when he was really at the height of his powers, and would have been most particularly at the height of his architectural creativity had he not died in the early years of the Depression, when architectural commissions were few and far between. It was in 5 skyscrapers that he designed during his career that I think you can best see Hood's creativity and also this brilliance that was so commented upon by his contemporaries. S.J. Wolfe effused about Hood and his sort of dynamic personality, as well as his business acumen, that Hood has reared no temples to dead gods. He has built workshops for living men, and in their construction he proclaimed the era of business, of machinery and speed. The word that you hear besides business and commercial with Raymond Hood is speed. And this idea that they're always racing around, they're revving up. They drove their cars fast. In fact, Hood had a car crash, I learned from Dan Okrent, and broke his arm and was in a sling for part of the time. I think it was just before one of his major commissions. So you just have the idea that the Roaring Twenties were really defined especially by Raymond Hood, but by this group of architects who clearly were amusing themselves as well as the world with this new architecture they were creating. And then can we go forward? I hope that's it. Yeah. So here he is, Raymond Hood in his probably late 40s, his penetrating eyes and his characteristic crew cut. The next, please. And we'll look at these 5 buildings, the 5 skyscrapers, through which I think you can best define Hood's career, because if you look at the scholarship on Hood of academics who have written monographs or incorporated his work into a broad sweep of the 1920s, most of those people seem to be sort of either confused or ambivalent about Hood's career. And I suppose the greatest enthusiast for Hood is Rem Koolhaas of the Office of Metropolitan Architecture in his great book, Delirious New York, who celebrates Hood as someone who was had an inherent contradiction, but who characterized what F. Scott Fitzgerald sort of defined as the litmus test of a great intellectual, and that is someone who is able to hold 2 opposing thoughts in his mind and in his activities and his creative character at the same time. If I find that particular, too many markers here, but that idea of a contradiction of styles is very clear, is very troubling across Hood's whole career. We're only going to really look at the skyscrapers. Even within the skyscrapers, you see from the Gothic style of the Chicago Tribune, the next place, to the somewhat Gothic character of this early modern work, the American Radiator or American Standard Building on Bryant Park, 40 West 40th Street, or the next one to the dramatically different Daily News building of about 1929, 1930, with its extreme verticality, its bold striping, its truncated top, and this carved form where it's just sliced off, as if sliced in section. And the next place, to the McGraw-Hill building on West 42nd Street, where, as you'll see later, the green terracotta tile breaks completely with any tradition of contemporary or certainly historical architecture. So it's clad in a green skin, and you can see it here glinting in the sun. But with these sharp, simple lines, and to the next, or the last of the five great towers, the RCA building, the centerpiece of Rockefeller Center. And these dramatically different in the choice of ornament in their in the style in which they are decorated is the wrong word, but stylistically expressed. What they share is this fundamental idea that you see throughout Hood's career, and it's the idée fixe of his architectural practice, is the idea of the tower. Raymond Hood loved towers, and in this he's utterly different than his good friends Ralph Walker or Eli Jacques Kahn, where the setback, the pyramidal ziggurat type typical form that, as we've seen in previous talks, is absolutely established almost irreversibly by the zoning law, the 1916 zoning law in New York. But Hood overcomes this. He, through his creativity and through his keen business sense, where he comes to terms with his clients in a kind of wily debate, where he's always out sort of one step ahead in thinking about how he's going to convince them to build his building instead of their budget. Hood is as brilliant a businessman in his creativity as he is an architect, with this wide range of expression. Always with the idea of creating a tower, and that's what we're going to explore through the slides in the lecture this evening. Yep. So this is just a slide that underscores the sort of theoretical impulse in much of his work, where he tries to create the tower form. And indeed, he tries to reinvent New York as a city of towers, not a city of setback superblocks or colossal setbacks, skyscrapers. The next, please, and that's what we're going to explore. This is a model that we recreated in that case in the exhibition. That was a plasticine model that illustrated in 3D the same investigation that you saw in that last sketch, which was by Hood's hand. This is a model that actually sat on Hood's desk in his architectural practice, and when a client would come in and say, I want to build a skyscraper, let's discuss it, he would show them this model and say, you can do this. No need to make that ziggurat, no need to do an Eli Jacques Kahn sort of decorated wedding cake setback, create a tower form. The next, please. Now, this inclination towards towers goes all the way back to his first works as an architect. This is his diploma prize, or his diploma thesis at the École des Beaux-Arts from 1911, and it's for a municipal building in Providence, Rhode Island. He was born in Pawtucket of quite a very well-to-do parents. He had attended MIT and graduated in 1903 with a bachelor's of science. He was interested in architecture. He decided to follow the same route that any would-be successful architect would follow, that is to go to Paris to study at the École des Beaux-Arts. He spent 8 years there in Paris and sort of coming back and forth. a number of people have written about with great amusement how he arrived very straight-laced and never drank wine and denounced any kind of bawdy kind of behavior. And by the time he left, he was the Raymond Hood of which the lifestyle was so admired by the people who mentioned his speed and his friends at the drinking clubs. So he liberated himself during these times at the École des Beaux-Arts, and he held the Beaux-Arts principles close in the remainder of his years of practice. And we'll see this sort of play between history and planning in his other work. But you can see that the attenuated tower is already something which is going to be the leitmotif of his visionary work and his sort of aspirations to build monumental architecture. Those will be satisfied through the commercial architecture of the skyscraper. The next, please. And this is what he looked like as a young man with his bow tie as he was studying in Paris in a daguerreotype photograph with his short cropped hair, but all the accoutrements of the young artist surrounding him, and looks pensive and creative. The next, please. And this, although he's not in this picture, some of his good friends are, is the sort of lineage of the École des Beaux-Arts in America. It's the Americanization and commercialization of the École des Beaux-Arts. This happens to be the famous photograph of the 1931 Beaux-Arts Ball, which was a tradition that every year was organized by the members of the alumni of the École of the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design, so here in New York, and graduates belonged to that club, and every year they put on, as was the practice in Paris, a great ball, which was usually a masquerade ball. And usually these were sort of romantic, the Arabian Nights, or some kind of Orientalism, exoticism. But modernism was the topic of 1931, and of course that's William Van Allen in the center as his Chrysler building, and all the other architects, and here's Eli Jacques Kahn, dressed up as their buildings. And Hood, unusually enough, isn't in this lineup, but he was one of the regular committee members in the organization of these fetes. The next, please. So the École des Beaux-Arts is a place that he trained, and he was very active in architectural organizations like the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design. He designed on East 44th Street, I think, the Beaux-Arts apartments, which are right next to, which would be right here on the street, the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design's headquarters in New York. So he remained very much a sort of party man and party liner with the traditions of the École des Beaux-Arts. The next, please. We'll look again at this building. But those years in between 1911, his graduation and his return to the U.S., and then the series of offices that he worked in, not only in New York, but in Boston for Cram, Goodhue, and Ferguson, then in Pittsburgh for Henry Hornbostel, and in between in another Hornbostel firm. And then coming to New York to settle in a small office where he hustled small jobs, and they were indeed very small, where he practiced with a friend, Rain Adams. And they left, Rain Adams wrote a number of accounts about their struggles as young architects, and how they had practically no commissions, and but Hood, even when some rich socialite came on occasion to ask him to do some kind of renovation, a bathroom or whatever, he would always, he would never capitalize on the opportunity, but would measure his ambitions to the particular assignment of that room. And one time, so famously, a woman came and said, "There's a crack in my bathroom, and I want an architect to fix it." He said, "Just hang a picture frame over it." So he was almost notoriously self-effacing, and and unambitious during these years in practice, but he had declared when he came to New York that he moved to New York to become New York's most famous architect, and indeed he did become that. But he was struggling through the years of the teens and through the early 20s until just in the early 1922, he was well known in architectural circles as a very good draftsman. He studied at the atelier. He had these sort of colleagues and associates who were all struggling together, but were a little bit more successful than he was. So he was known in the architectural community, and the story goes that when the Chicago Tribune competition was announced in 1922, that, of course, this was, and we've talked about it a number of times before, this was the most spectacular opportunity for architects. It was the most publicized and promoted of architectural events. And the new headquarters building that was promised as a commission to the winner of the competition was also carried prize money of a $50,000 first prize, and then $20,000, $10,000, and some sort of honorable mention runners-up fees. So a lot of people competed. In fact, over 260 different architects competed. But there were a few invited participants, and one of them was John Mead Howells, who was a fairly conservative, again, Beaux-Arts-trained New York architect, who was distantly related, or was a cousin of the leadership of the McCormick's of the Chicago Tribune, and he was one of the invited participants. And the story goes that he was way too busy with his own work. He needed somebody to collaborate with him. He bumped into Raymond Hood in Grand Central as he was thinking about, how am I going to manage everything, and invited Hood in order to participate and to do the drawings to develop the design. They were later credited as collaborators rather than simply as an employee, an assistant to John Mead Howells. But lo and behold, they did win the competition with this design that we've seen before of a Gothic tower that's modeled on the details in terms of the ornament of the Butter Tower in Rouen, so French Gothic style. But with a kind of emphatic verticality and a very clean organization of the fenestration and the lighting system that was necessary for a modern skyscraper to illuminate the interior, and with an idea about the tower being one thing. And that's something that I'd like to read a little bit about what Hood wrote at the time, very close to the time, about their design, because I think it helps to establish this idea of the search for a tower form which was strident, which was simplified, and which was, as he talks about it, as all one thing. So describing their intention, so Hood stated, "We feel that in this design we have produced a unit. It is not a tower or a top placed on a building. It's all one building. It climbs into the air naturally, carrying its main structural lines and binding them together with a high open parapet. Our desire has been not so much to secure an archaeological expression of any particular style as to express on the exterior the essentially American problem of skyscraper construction, with its continued vertical lines and inserted horizontals. We have wished to make this landmark the study of a beautiful and vigorous form, not of an extraordinary form." Can I have the next, please? Now, in the scholarship of the reactions to the Chicago Tribune competition, both at the time and also when I was in graduate school studying art history, this entry, the second prize winner by Eliel Saarinen, the Finnish architect, was much more highly praised for being stylish, and therefore being more progressive, moving more towards establishing a modern style rather than a historical dress for the skyscraper. So it received a great deal of attention and praise by the critics. Indeed, Hood opined on it and said he found it an extremely beautiful form, and particularly liked the drawing style of Saarinen, as so many others praised the great delicacy of the line. The next, please. And it was all one thing, too, just exactly like the description that I read of Hood's description of his own design. And I think that if you look at the drawings, some of the preparatory drawings survive in the Archives of American Art, in Hood's sketches. And you can see in the early sketches the sense that this is one organic form, something that seems to be sculpted, perhaps, because it's more abstract at the base and it more breaks out into ornament towards the spire. The next, please. But you can see that sort of fundamental idea that this is one tower rising in an expressed vertical that then carries some of the detail, some of the ornament into a kind of elegance and upward aspiring, pointing to the sky, as we always describe Gothic spires. So it uses a language of Gothic to seem appropriate in its delicacy, in its aspiration, but it's the strength of the tower that seems to describe the office building below that makes this a functional building as much as it does one of artistry. The next, please. More of Hood's drawings, and you can see he has drawings in pencil. He has a very delicate hand, so he clearly could draw extremely well, trained in the Beaux-Arts manner. But we'll also see later how he rejects drawing as a design method and takes to modeling and sculpting in clay and in plaster. So he had the ability and the facility to draw as well as any architect of the day. But he chose not to, and he chose this more sculptural approach. The next, please. So the tower, just to look at some clean images of the masonry facade, but you can see how the verticalism is all very strongly expressed, and the setback, slight recession of the windows so that they're treated in a band is a particular point of attention that Hood will use in the American Radiator Building next, and we can have the next image too, and then in all of the work. In this, not a Hood drawing, but a document, a book that was compiled by Edward Hoke on masterpieces of American architecture. You can see, interesting how you can, sectionally the building breaks away, so those top more ornamental floors are all usable space. But you can also see how or you can imagine here at least how the floor plans all create the highest quality space around the central elevator core. The next, please. So this very four-square upright tower is the expression of beauty that won him the commission, and that Hood writes about in his expression, in his sort of testament to the idea of the tower being the appropriate form for the skyscraper. He gets the opportunity, the next place, to explore this in a commission. Well, here we see some details. They're rather confusing, but the carved stonework of the lobby, you can see, looks a little bit more like a chapel than a skyscraper, but these are some of the Tribune's ground floor entrance lobby church-like details. The next, please. Yeah. So his next commission in 1923 So even before the Tribune Tower starts to rise, because it's finished in 1925, they get the commission and the $50,000 prize, of which $10,000 is shared by Howells with Hood, and that's $10,000 that he owed to people and sort of kept them eating and kept them going. But the key to winning was the fame that came along with this celebrated competition and commission. Very quickly, clients began to pursue him. And a client that he had worked for only with some renovation of interiors was the American Standard Company, which is also called the American Radiator Company. They still make plumbing and advertise that. And this was their headquarters building on Bryant Park at 40 West 40th. And you can see here next to it the typical kind of tower. In fact, it's by Eli Jacques Kahn, the Engineers Club. There's also the Explorers Club. Just a street facade rising straight up, cut off, little classical sort of graphic details on the facade, but it's what architects called the sort of street front architecture, just a wall straight up from the street, sort of like wallpaper that was stretched up. Hood's building, by contrast, it takes the tower form, and it's extremely three-dimensional. And this was the clear impetus, the design impetus, in his concept that we'll see in a series of sketches and models. The other thing about it, of course, that was seen especially as a symbol of modernity is the illuminated top. The next, please, which was which was painted by Georgia O'Keeffe as a symbol of the new architecture in New York. This is a painting of 1927. But you see in her painting something that's of interest and something that concerned Hood very much, and you saw in the last slide. It's the interior of the building shining out. It's the late night work of the office space that breaks up the massiveness, that destroys the monolith of the stony black building, and instead the light sort of breaks through, penetrates, turns it into a perforated form. The next, please. And that's exactly what Hood was trying to overcome in his design. And when we see it during the daylight in slides in a moment, you'll see the black brick. That's the particular characteristic of the American Radiator building, and then the gold detail on the tops of the terracotta, the finials, and the rather Gothic ornament. And this contrast of black and gold has been described in a number of ways. Sometimes like the burning embers on top of the coal, like in the furnaces of the American Radiator sort of equipment that they sold. Hood himself referred to the Gothic architecture of Brussels and the black, actually soot black because it was blackened by pollution, but the Gothic architecture and then gold details. So you can see the continuing sort of vehicle of Gothic to express height and to express literally towering height in what was really a fairly small building, only 23 stories. But the thing that turns this building into a tower is what you can see in this small massing model, and we'll see in others. The buildings that you saw, the street front facades, are adjacent there. The building sits on a rather large plot, but then all of this space that could have been used straight up to the lot line, and so would have been a continuous wall overlooking the park, instead is pulled away from either side, and the tower stretches up in the center. So in a mid-block location, like with Corbett's Bush building that was already finished at this time, it had been built in 1917, you have the unusual situation of the architect convincing a client to pull the building away from the sides, to forego some of the available space, and to turn turn the form into a tower. And Hood wrote about that. Can I have the next image, please? These the plaster studies that were in Hood's office, and he used these. He used a massing study, then a eighth scale model, then a quarter scale, and then a half scale. And he used these plaster models and also clay ones later in the design process before any drawings were made. He made the drawings at the end of the process after these details were being sculpted were being sculpted in solid form. And then the architectural drawings, often to full scale, were done as a last stage, rather than using the Beaux-Arts method of sketching first. So he takes the sculptural method. He wrote of explaining how he had convinced his enlightened clients, the businessmen clients, American Radiator, to take his advice and turn a tower. He said, "Throwing away 16 feet of valuable available frontage is a thing that any real estate agent can demolish by 1,000 financial reasons. But in this particular instance, the deed was done before they knew it." He, a little bit, as I said before, sort of outsmarted his clients, or he used what's more accurate, I think, a business logic to sell them on the idea. And in this case, his idea was creating a tower because towers are beautiful. But the business logic of it was pulling the tower away from the adjacent walls so that, the next please, every side of the building could get good quality light. And so when you see it from the back side of the block, from the 40th Street side, you can see the setbacks were sort of disguised. He didn't like setbacks. He liked this straight shaft of a tower. From straight up on 40th Street, you get that rising form. The rest of it, the setbacks are hidden, but you can see that it's pulled away on either side from the lot lines, so that all the way around on all four sides, each one of the offices, it has a window that illuminates the space, not just from one side or from the front side or the back side. The next, please. And here's the tower with its gold terracotta ornament, which, as you see at the top, is rather generalized and abstracted. It has certainly the building has a Gothic feel to it in the sense that it sort of scales up, but in a lot less literal way than the Chicago Tribune. And the next, please. And on the ground level, there's this rather, well, we'll see it in very vibrant polychrome. Let's go forward one and see the colored gold terracotta carved forms. I don't know of anybody who has parsed out what Hood might have designed and what other people in the office did. I seriously doubt that these were by Hood, but I think the overall sensibility and the more abstract character of the ornament is Hood's. But you can see that there is a rather riotous mix of figurative work, of a kind of corbelled bas-relief that is is much more historical, but at the same time isn't very specific in any style. The next, please. And this is more detail, and this has a kind of Gothic finial quality to it. It looks a little bit metallic, but it also looks a little bit like a tower, and I wanted to draw that analogy, I think, with the next slide. In a series of investigations that Hood did in 1924 and 25, 26, and really through 27, when he explored in a series of drawings, but then also in a series of publications, this idea of tower buildings on wide streets and the idea of a city of towers. This one is more of a visionary character, although there seems to have been some kind of talk, a general discussion about a client that might have been General Electric or one of the other energy or lighting companies for a building that was written up in some of the architectural magazines and sort of the gossip columns called the Electric Tower. And this seems to have been a sketch for an electric tower. There's another one that I showed in an exhibition that I did a long, long time ago on Hood that had written in the center there, Mazda lamps. And this seems to be for a site that was discussed at the where the New York Central building is, at the base of Park Avenue at Grand Central. That site hadn't been developed at the time. This tower, as you can see from some of the benchmarks there, was to have been either 1,200 or 1,400 feet tall, which would have been by far the tallest building in the world at the time. The next, please. So you can see the slightly Gothicizing quality of it is as if one of his Gothic towers, Chicago Tribune or American Standard, had been stretched way, way out on taffy, and then all of its sort of curlicue ornament breaks out at the top. And in 1924, Hood is quoted at great length in this particular article written by a colleague in his circle and a good friend of Hugh Ferris's, Oric Johns. And this, which you can't read there, is City of Needles, according to an idea by Raymond Hood, and is rendered by Hugh Ferris. And there you see a kind of version. It seems to be it's on a round base like this electric tower. These are towers that are supposed to be about 1,200 feet tall. They look a little like asparagus in a field. They're so tall and thin. But you can see that they're also connected by fast-moving arteries filled with high-speed cars. But they stand in the sunlight, and each one's separated. And this idea of the city of towers connected by upper-level bridges and multi-level highways is something that we see throughout the exhibition, but is generally communicated as these giant setback towers with full block bases so that they cover a New York City block. These instead are point towers, and they stand each one separate in full sunlight. The next, please. And he advocated for this idea in his interviews in this particular article, and then in a series of articles that he authored himself in 1926. It's a closer view of the drawing. The next, please. This is the other version of what one expects to see, and we looked at it in the lecture series before, the setback towers here on a full block site that were rendered as the four stages by Hugh Ferris, and this is early as 1922, seen as a city that's growing up according to the templates that's established by the 1916 zoning law. The next, please. So this is not what Hood was interested in, nor was this kind of vernacular that developed in the commercial architecture of the day, and so in the late 1920s, nor was that what Hood aspired to in his buildings. And he, in each commission, tried to turn the setback into a tower. The next, please. The same idea as the City of Needles returns in a 1926 article written by Hood himself called New York's Skyline Will Climb Much Higher. And here the buildings are no longer sort of apparent masonry, but they seem now to be glass. So they seem to glow from within. And in the typical Hugh Ferris dramatization with searchlights and sort of glinting faceted architecture, they seem more crystalline than lithic. The next, please. And as part of this same article in Interior, in a rather sad little sketch that is never monumentalized in any other version that I've ever found in Hood's writings, there's this very suggestive idea called the city of trees, or buildings like trees. So the asparagus, I think, isn't too far off. There's a kind of organic quality to them, but once again, they're point towers, and each one separated by space and by transportation. Now, the next, please. The same idea he explores in a much more urban context. In an article that appeared in several different places in the Architectural Forum and in the American Architect and in a British journal too. And this is called, often called the City of Towers. Well, actually, there are a couple more, I think, fairly eloquent descriptions of the pinnacle city that I think are worth reading and sort of getting under our belts in order to get inside of Hood's head. So if, Emma, why don't you go back to the City of Needles one? Or yeah, that's good. That's good. So he wrote, suppose that Manhattan Island were to be dotted with towers 1,000 or 1,500 feet tall, a forest of towers, of spires of commerce, 500 feet apart. Between them, broad spaces, parks where workers can find rest and recreation, shade, peace, and where there will be wide avenues with light traffic. On the first level, below the surface, will be our great stores. Bad weather would have no effect on business. Blizzards that now paralyze the city would be scoffed at. On one level, on the lower level, we'd have our rapid transit. So these aren't visible in the city, just the cars on the ground plane. The subways or the tubes. And on this level, there would be commodious sidewalks for pedestrians and splendid thoroughfares for high-speed motor cars. We shall, of course, be using air transport, as we now travel in motor cars. Great landing stages will be provided for the lighter-than-air conveyances, and the City of Towers there will be ample room for landing fields on the ground for airplanes. And he says, inasmuch as there are no argument that something will have to be done, this scheme of a City of Towers would have the desired effect of giving us sunlight, fresh air, parks, recreation, and parking space, and at least four times, the present space for traffic. And solving that problem of traffic becomes the key idea. And let's go forward now to the images of the urban scheme that are really applied in New York, where he takes the business motive and sort of the capitalist impulse and argues that New York, as it's rebuilding itself in the next sort of levels of skyscraper development, as the either five or 6 story walk-up brownstones are replaced by taller towers, or here the mid-rise commercial buildings of the late 19th or early 20th century give way to skyscrapers. He says, let's not use that sort of dark and cavernous model of the setback zoning law with its like mountains and precipices. Let's open up the city to the sunshine, and let's create a new formula. And he offers something that's very much like the FAR that would be introduced not until 1961 into our zoning law. So not a setback according to an angle of light, but a formula based on frontage that he offered. That was for every 1 foot of frontage, you were supposed to get 500 extra square feet of space that you could pile up into a tower. So it was like a zoning bonus. It was like a floor area ratio that we would get another about 50 years later than he was proposing it. And he says that, as owners and developers begin to assemble land parcels for a lot, it's going to be in their interest to pull back away from the street line, to open up more area of circulation for traffic, and to pile their commercial space and their rentable space into tall towers. The next, please, and so you can see in his own handwriting as he prescribes how this might be done. And there's his office in the American Standard building. He signs up at the very top. And so on a single New York block, as it becomes modernized, he imagines that the 600 or 800 foot block between avenues and the 200 feet between cross streets would be completely renewed and reinvented through this point support. This point tower, where circulation around the bases is unfortunately not public plaza space, but would have been given over to more to vehicular traffic. The next, please. And the formula, they says you can see the typical street plan and how it would look once his suggestion for incentivizing towers over setbacks was adopted. Next, please. And here's the article from the American Architect, and he wrote about this. These are in his own words what I just described. Suppose, for example, that municipal regulation were made establishing the volume and consequently the floor area at 500 feet for each foot of frontage, a basis that if all buildings in the city were developed accordingly, the existing streets would be sufficient to handle resulting traffic. Such a law would be no more of an abridgment of property rights than the present zoning laws, height restrictions, or rear yard requirements. In this new plan provided, the developer sets his buildings far enough back from the street, and the property owner can build almost double the volume and produce double the rental returns. We now have made it in the interest of the property owner to widen the street at no cost to the city. It's to his advantage to give the city the part of his own land to prevent the congestion of which his own building is the chief cause. The next, please. And this is very much a response to the current debate that we discussed. For those of you who were here for the Corbett lecture, Corbett was obsessed by the idea of traffic in the city and solving that problem, which he proposed be solved with multiple levels that separated transit, wheels, vehicles, and pedestrians on a level above. And that he proposed in many, many drawings, and to a large extent at Rockefeller Center became the system that was used in the first design. We've seen before the model version, the 3D version of this same idea that you saw in the series of drawings. The next, please. Now, by contrast, the European idea of reinventing the modern city is probably most famously advanced by Le Corbusier in a series of polemical works that he wrote and most importantly illustrated in 1922 and in 1925, and then again through the 1920s. So the Plan Voisin, the city for 2 million people, the Ville Contemporaine, then the Plan Voisin, all advanced the idea of the separate zones of residential space surrounding in swaths at lower rise a nucleus of towers, of these cruciform towers that would be the office space, the commercial space of the city. And of course this is for a reinvented Paris. There's the Ile de la Cité, Ile Saint-Louis, and you knock down the Louvre, you knock down all of the historic quartier of Paris, and you put up gleaming glass towers and spread sunlit low-rise housing blocks and parks and factories extended in zones beyond, with a landing strip in the very center for the same concerns that aeroplanes be able to conveniently deliver their businessmen to the central city. This idea has often been argued was the influence over Hood's own thinking about the city of towers, the American version of the city of towers. But I think you can see very clearly how utterly different it is in its inspiration as well as in its style. Later in 1929, Hood will take over some of the cruciform shapes, and in an article in Nation's Business, he seems to be influenced stylistically by some of the ideas of European modernism. But what's so clear in the other drawings, in their style, in their consistent evolution of the concern of the tower, in the problems of traffic, in the response to the problems of the modern city that Hood articulates are the problems that he's trying to solve through his architecture, that Hood's ideas come out of the city of New York, its congestion, the problem generically of the modern city, of the automobile, of the skyscraper, and are not a polemical response to ideas about how a modern architecture and a socialist society can reinvent a society through new architectural forms, as was the idea of Le Corbusier. The next, please. So here's Hood in his somewhat split personality between being the architect of the metropolis, as he's the architect of congestion. He famously professed on many occasions in architectural debates on panels that congestion is good. And like Corbett, who argued that though solving the problems of traffic flow was one of the principal issues that architects needed to confront, the idea that the activity of the city, that its energy, is something that the architects valued, and that as we've been reading, we've been thinking about Hood and reading what other people wrote, he thrived on that energy. He was ultimately an architect who loved congestion, who celebrated the intensity of the city. But he lived in Stamford, Connecticut, and the next place, in the house that he is at his mansion, he commuted in every day. And when he built himself his own castle, he built this rather pastoral and perhaps sort of English country style garden type abode. The next, please. And his stylistic expression was not entirely consistent, even as he made an argument about modernism. When he received the commission for the London headquarters of the American Radiator Company, which is called the National Radiator Company in London, he designed this black, I guess it's a basalt building, so it's a very tight, taut, and polished skin with rather elaborate Art Deco ornaments in the frieze zone at the cornice and also at the entrances. The next, please. It's often observed that this design seems to follow the inspiration of Adolf Loos from his 1922 competition for the American Radiator Building, and I don't know if I subscribe to that or not, but I figured it was at least worth showing, again, Loos's amusing entry. The next, please. So that kind of Art Deco ornament seems to be inconsistent with the professed love of integral ornament and the organic nature of Gothic that Hood was describing in his early commissions in that Gothicizing style. So Hood belonged to the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design. He partied with the American group of Beaux-Arts architects at their annual balls. He discussed the modern style in the forums that were presented at Macy's and the Allied Arts Forum. He exhibited this work at the Machine Age Exposition in 1927. He seems to sort of fall very much within the fashionable zone, kind of ribbon of Art Deco that was being embroidered on buildings in this era, and was certainly the typical work of his good friends, especially Eli Jacques Kahn. The next, please. So he seems to be an Art Deco architect, and he does a number of commissions. This one is for Joseph Patterson, who is his great patron for the Daily News building. It's on just off Fifth Avenue on 84th Street, an apartment tower that has a very spare and localized zones of Art Deco ornament in a kind of pinkish terracotta, but no great shakes, and nothing. The next, please. That would that marks Hood as an architect on the of great invention and on the edge, but Hood was great, especially when he had great clients, and so Joseph Medill Patterson, who you see here, was a cousin of McCormick of the Chicago Tribune newspaper, and he's reading his own daily news tabloid there. The next, please. He had in 1928 to 30 invited Hood to be the architect of his own house, country house in Connecticut, where a quite radically spare, and one can't call it international style modern, but a highly reduced, abstracted, modernistic form was what he chose. But he described it as something that was without style. He said, I wanted the building to disappear into the landscape. And when he had the commission, when he came to Hood for the commission for the Daily News building, he said, build me a factory. And it was Hood's ambition and his business acumen, again, that turned the factory into a tower, and that tower into one of the great statements of modernistic design of skyscrapers in New York or anywhere. And you can see, in contrast to the also contemporary rising Chrysler building, that that the Daily News is so reductive, so angular, so geometric compared to the piled up boxes and the surface weaving of patterns, and then the sort of efflorescent ornament of the metallic crown of the Chrysler building. So Chrysler building, even though it's taller and more monumental, seemed almost toy-like compared to this sharp, abstracted form of just the bold stripes, the black and white of the Daily News building. The next, please. And when you see it looking across in its context, 42nd Street by Grand Central, with the background, the Tudor City towers rising up rather like historic attenuated French chateau. You see again how bold those straight stripes are, and they were much commented upon at the time by critics. Even Frank Lloyd Wright, who actually liked this building, talked about how it seemed like that Hood had just rolled the newspaper columns, the rolls of paper straight up, and then just cut it off clean. That was a gesture which was so dramatically different than any of his contemporaries. The next, please. And you see in his sketches the analysis of floor areas, of the plan, and the elevator core, of the massing and the setbacks that were required by the zoning law. And then the next, please. And all of these calculations were part of his design process and his discussion with his client, who wanted a 6-story printing plant on East 42nd Street. And he needed a little office space. So Hood convinced him, and Walter Killam narrates all of this because he was in the office at the time and he went to a lot of the meetings. And Killam describes how cagey Hood was in the steps of the debate or the argument in convincing Patterson to do a tower, and said, well, you need some office space, so why not put a tower on top of that? So you have the production plant in the back stretching over to the east and on the back side of the building, because you went all the way through the block, and then you'll put a tower on there. But as long as you're doing a tower, you might as well get a little rental space out of it. So let's make it a little bit taller. And once the tower was established as a moneymaker, as a revenue producer, then we could stretch the tower out a little bit, but that was going to be adjacent to another lot. So this alleyway that's a cut through is an easement that was sacrificed by the Daily News in order to make an alleyway there, but that allowed this lot line to have windows on it rather than to be a blank wall. So just as he had done with the American Radiator building, he pulled the building away from its lot lines and stretched a tower up through the center so that the building would stand free in space and have windows that looked out on all four sides, would be illuminated by daylight, as all buildings in the 1930s depended on daylight to illuminate the workspace. And in this series of office photos that were taken by Killam, you can see, and we'll see them in more detail, the steps of the carving, the literal carving of the zoning envelope, shaving it down into the sculptural form so that the expression of a sheer vertical tower emerges from the larger opportunities on the site that the zoning law would have allowed. The next, please, you can see that in so here is the actual clay block, or the plasticine, that they used in the office in order to describe what the maximum amount of space was that the zoning law would have allowed on the site. And then as Killam writes about how Hood came in and other people were preparing this model, and Hood comes in and he takes a knife, and the next one, please. That zoning law is like the Hugh Ferris drawings that we've now seen on a number of occasions. The next, please. With that block of clay, he takes the knife and he shaves it down in order to create one flat rise, and then a couple of setbacks here. Eventually, he did get, there's one setback in the actual building, and then the tower rises sheer on the 42nd Street side, and sheer on the sides. And as Killam wrote, he said, I was completely astonished that after all the discussion about convincing the client to make more space, that he was slicing away rentable space, but he was doing it in order to create a tower form. And Killam said, the way architects speak of design, that he said, in that moment with the knife, the concept had arrived. The building design had arrived. The next, please. And there you see the tower in a plaster model with its alleyway that allows the tower to pull back and to have windows. You can see the small puncture holes indicating the fenestration around on every side. And on the side that you don't see, the back side of the building, the space is maximized, and the angle of light of the zoning law is followed in that series of setbacks, but that's completely disguised on the front side, the 42nd Street entrance. The next, please. Also, the bold stripes. Glazed brick was, of course, not at all uncommon. Glazed terracotta had been used on many buildings, but one need only think of the Woolworth Tower. Colored brick as highlights was also fairly common, and we saw the black brick of the American Radiator. That was unusual at the time. Black brick was only used in the early 1920s as a kind of highlight, as an ornamental graphic motif, and brick was more usually beige or red color. Here, the white glazed brick, some people think of it as the rolls of paper or the columns of the newspaper, are used in contrast with these recessive spandrels that are in red brick and black, and just a geometric motif, so that in between and set back behind the vertical piers, you get the next, please, this strong sense of, you can see a little bit of the color here, of a slight red tinge and black, so that the white really stands out. It emerges from the surface, and the stripes then disguise the windows, so they don't look like the puncture holes. They look like continuous bands. The next, please. But the Art Deco-ish part of the building is its base, where the sculptural program proclaims the title of the paper, the name of the paper, The News, and then has modern bas-relief sculpture and allusions to Abraham Lincoln, the common people. He made so many of them, as they said. The next, please. The dramatic interior with the globe, that touch of theatricality is something that one finds continuously in Hood, and so one enters the simplicity of the street into this domed space of black glass with a globe at the center, illuminated from below, so it seems rather to float. The outside ring of metal also reflects the light and gets absorbed by the darkness of the black glass, but also the facets that give it a little bit of like a jewel-like or crystalline glint. The next, please. And the Hugh Ferris rendering, emphasizing both its whiteness and its verticality. The next, please. The stripes go the other way in the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design, and just to show you some other projects and to emphasize his connection to his love of the École des Beaux-Arts and his connection to that community of architects. This was a program of pied-à-terre with a developer, which was done in cooperation with Kenneth Murchison, another architect who was also a developer. So they invested money in this site, and each one of the little townhouses, the maisonette, and then the little pied-à-terre studios were created as a kind of studio or overnight space for people who lived like Hood did in Stamford, Connecticut, and wanted to stay out, whatever, drinking late at night or whatever. The Beaux-Arts apartments were for that kind of lifestyle. The next, please. I have quite a few images of them here. You can see that they're rather loft-like in their bulkiness as you see them in an aerial view. The next, please. But they had full regalia, and so that's the doorman, with like a gendarme, keeping you in the mood of Gay Paris. No, they're there. Mm-hmm. Next, please. The lobby, there is some of the details of the lobby, not the furniture, exist any longer, and it's a kind of India red mixed in black veining. The next, please. And a rare view of the interior that I've gotten from a very small illustration in one of the magazines. The space is divided up into several levels in order to make it seem, I guess, larger by its change of floor height. The next, please. So I'm going to go very quickly now through the rest of these, but the visionary proposals during the same time that Hood was absorbed in the idea of street and congestion and advocating for towers, he also participated in this sort of frothy visionary speculation that Corbett and Ferris particularly illustrated, as Ferris drew the idea for bridge homes that were discussed in this article, again by Oric Johns, but where Hood is widely quoted about bridge communities that would have thousands of people that occupied chic apartments on the pylons of the bridges, and then on the roadbed were lined with a kind of townhouses on either side. I think the next, please, has another version of that. Bridge communities. From a second Hugh Ferris drawing, but to an idea that he credits Hood with. And so here's a little bit about the bridge communities. Besides shops, the theaters, and the broad esplanades where the bridge dwellers would meet, another feature bringing them together would be the gardens on the roofs. They would run continuously the length of the bridges, intercommunicating by means of stairways, real gardens with grass and flowers and shrubbery and moonlight just as good as any to be had on land. Water sports would thrive. Facilities could easily be provided by descending by elevator to the water level, attired in bathing suits for the daily dip. the complete equipment of the bridge citizen would include aquaplane and motorboat, as well as prosaic automobile. These would be sheltered by arrangements under the bridge, garages beneath the main deck, suspended hangars, and anchorage for boats in the water. Each bridge would have its own churches, schools, shops, perhaps even a community theater. Rivalry would exist between them over the prowess of their respective inhabitants in art, in sport, and in civic usefulness. The kind of lifestyle that he imagined for all the people who lived in the city doesn't go much below, I think the phrase he uses, brokers, bankers, and lawyers in one of his other quotes. And you can imagine that this lavish lifestyle would have to be supported by very high rents, and especially for your aquaplane and all of that, to keep that apart conveniently. But this incredibly optimistic urbanism, where the riches and the technology of the modern age invents lifestyles which are glamorous and convenient and possible within the broad spectrum of diversity that is New York, is a party line that Hood writes about with really great relish. He says the lightness, simplicity, and lack of applied nope, excuse me, I'm in the wrong place. The next, please. What's going? This idea that we've seen before, the multiplication of these bridge communities, there are at least 24 of them here, were drawn for exhibition in 1930 at the Architectural League's annual exhibition. And they combined with these node centers of Skyscraper interchanges where zoning allowed the great piling up of commercial space. The next, please. The drawings of the bridge communities. I think the next one is the view down into the skyscraper centers, which is a drawing that we have in the exhibition, and which became the frontispiece for a monograph in 1931 written by Alfred North about Hood. So that the idea of urbanism and towers is really central to understanding the man, according to this kind of summary of his career to date in 1931. The next, please. And so quickly, the idea of the City of the Towers, he advances once again in 1929 in a typical forum for him, the magazine called Nation's Business. And here we have the cruciform towers that one might attribute the influence of Corbusier being expressed here. And here you see just one block being carved out as a cross-shaped tower takes over some of the existing city fabric. The next, please. And just to remind you what Corbusier was doing at that time, at the same time. The next, please. So we'll talk next week about Rockefeller Center. So I'll just preview briefly here Hood's own role, and then we'll look at it in much more detail in our hour next week. But an article that he wrote for the New York Times called The Hanging Gardens of New York, and he makes the analogy to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, was one of the great ideas that Hood contributed to this project. And the gardens that you see on the rooftops are his idea. The next, please. Here you see him with Wally Harrison, who had joined the firm there, and Reinhardt of Reinhardt and Hoffmeister, part of the Associated Architects of Rockefeller Center. They're sort of the belly of the building architects that did the floor plans. And Hood was brought on really for the inspiration for many of the ideas of the overall plan, but especially for the Central Tower, the RCA building, and for the idea that he contributed of roof gardens. The next, please. And typically, the roof gardens were something that he sold to his client, who was, of course, John D. Rockefeller Jr., but whose emissary was J.R. Todd, who was the project manager, the overall manager of the construction site. we'll look at this again later, but of course the great central tower, now called 30 Rockefeller Center, but when it was the center of the deal, it was to be Radio City with the RCA headquarters and studios occupying about 1 million square feet of the over 2 million square feet of space that was to be created. That was cut back by the realities of the Depression, but they did become a key tenant. And this centerpiece of the complex, which will turn 75 years anniversary this year, and which we will we will celebrate on May 8th with a symposium with Daniel Okrent, Hilary Bowen, and James Sanders, and I think probably Bill Pedersen, talking about Rockefeller Center's urbanism and its existence as a mega project. Anyway, this is its big year, and this is the 75th anniversary of 30 Rock. The next, please. So the only thing that I want to say about it at this point, you'll see a few pictures of the roof gardens because they fit into the visionary urbanism theme that Hood, as we've seen, has been exploring in his writings throughout the 1920s. But the way that one experiences the RCA building, especially when you're on Fifth Avenue and you look through the Channel Gardens, you see it on axis in a Beaux-Arts way, where you're commanded to stand in the center space in order to properly experience the tower. So as you stand on Fifth Avenue in the middle of that block and you look straight up, you don't see any of the back of the building. You see none of its breadth as it stretches back to 6th Avenue. Instead, you see it as a tower, and it rises sheer, straight up, with a few setbacks that articulate actually the elevator banks as they fall away. But you experience it as a sheer tower, as sheer and tall as those 1924 projects for the City of Needles. The next, please. And this other idea that Hood contributes of the gardens on the rooftops, he sells to the client, Todd, by saying, well, there's 7 acres of roofs at Rockefeller Center with all these different buildings. Now, Mr. Todd, you know, everything matters about the beauty of a building, and you know that buildings that are built over parks get higher rents than those that look on the backside, you know, tops of water tanks and equipment penthouses. So, you know, if this building were to overlook a park, how much more rent do you think you could get for that space than if it were just ugly rooftops? And Todd, you know, thought, and he answered $1 a square foot. And Hood then argues, well, you've got 7 acres of space, of park space to be developed if you pay the extra, I think, $1 million for the roofs. And it did, in a quick calculation of the square feet of interior space overlooking the roofs, Todd was almost immediately convinced of the idea that a roof garden was not just viable, it could be profitable. And the next, please. And Killam, who was there at the time for the argument, said the next day the sculptors came in, the model makers came in, and they were putting roof gardens over all of the buildings. And here you see Rene Chamblin's clay foliage. The next, please. So that idea of business and commerce and culture being married in Hood's idea of the tower, you see in all of his work. And in this last of his towers, the McGraw-Hill building, the great mixed-use tower, not an office building except at the top half, but like the Daily News, a printing plant for the McGraw-Hill publication with light manufacturing on the lower zones. And the next, please. A kind of factory aesthetic. I mean, this looks like a factory that's been stretched out. It doesn't look like an office building, but it doesn't look like a skyscraper office building. It's banded in the horizontal, which is unusual for Hood. You know, here he's contradicted himself completely from the orientation of the Daily News building. It's got casement windows like a loft factory that accentuate the horizontals, but also make the building feel like it's like a volume of air, like there's a skin of glass enclosing this a big lighted interior space, and especially with the color, this sea foam green or the turquoise color, also denying any kind of solidity or stony carved quality. The next, please. And so here you see the building going up where the cladding barely looks any lighter than the open frame of the steel cage. So everything within a kind of airiness, a kind of lightness and spatial volume. The next, please. And this idea, and here it is in color, and actually the original color, of course the turquoise of the terracotta, much of it is still the original. There's been a lot of facade work and replacement, but the windows have lost their original polychrome. They were an apple green, and they were on the inside, the reveals of the windows, they were vermilion. So there was a red color contrasted with an apple green. The next, please. And so that's what the office space of the manufacturing plants, clerical workers looked like. The next, please. And what it looks like, as it's overcome by some of the new residential towers on 42nd Street, and of course the Port Authority in the foreground. The next, please. And the great streamlined, metallic, sort of speed lines of both the graphics of McGraw-Hill, but also the lobby. The next place is sort of the curvature of the lobby as these lines sort of shoot you into the interior space and have a kind of maybe automotive or at least a kind of accelerated quality to them. The next, please. So that everything seems to be, sort of rushing you into the main lobby space, to the elevators, and the spare nature of the decoration, other than this linearity, is something that seems to be a characteristic of a very contemporary 1929-1930 modernism. The next, please. And but with a kind of Art Deco panache of these rather heavy fixtures, but and the love of polychrome, of course, which is also characteristic of late 20s Art Deco inspired work. The next, please. So we're at the end almost. By 1929 and 1930, clearly Hood was taking over some of the mannerisms of international style design. He, of course, went back and forth to France on regular trips. As long as he had the money and the time, he would go off and see what's new in Paris. He attended the 1925 Expo. He was absorbing some of the ideas in the literature of Le Corbusier. Walter Killam writes that he lent Hood his own copy of Vers en Architecture, and Hood read it and gave it back to him. So we know that he absorbed a lot of those ideas. He must have been thinking about them, but he doesn't really. He seems to be just sort of taking over the surface rather than completely comprehending the entire argument of the polemical modernism of leaders like the Bauhaus, Mies van der Rohe, and Le Corbusier, who were shown at the MoMA in 1932. The next, please. By contrast, we'll go back in a minute, he's producing at the same time the commercial sort of branding architecture of the Rex Cole refrigerator and kitchen equipment showrooms that you see here in his more Art Deco style, and now go back to the idea for a tower in the country, which he imagined being a lifestyle that people who, rather than wanted to take a country house, but who wanted to play golf and enjoy the fresh air of the countryside might want to buy a kind of proto-condominium kind of apartment tower in country towers. I think I won't read that. I'll just go forward. But and he became involved in two big projects. One was the 1933 Century of Progress, and this other is this terminal city, which didn't get any farther than this drawing. The next, please. Where I want to leave him is with where we'll begin next time about about Rockefeller Center, because Hood's reputation, I think, is much summarized and exemplified through a project like Rockefeller Center that combines real estate ambitions, cultural aspirations, urban vision in terms of the scale of the project, but a kind of commercial savvy that was absolutely necessary in order to make the whole thing work. And I'll just read the end of the chapter on Hood that I've written that I think sort of summarizes the argument as succinctly as I can. Said, the phrase commercial architecture is not an oxymoron, as some sort of scholars of modernism or partisans of modernism and international style modernism denounced Hood for being too much of a commercial architect. Skyscrapers resist aesthetic experiments, but they do not preclude them, as Hood's buildings show. His extraordinary accomplishment was to innovate within the narrow constraints of the type. Working within the market standards for first-class interiors, he rejected the ubiquitous setback solutions and made towers that each had a strong individual identity. Hood understood skyscrapers as business propositions, and his urbanism was narrowly focused on the commercial center. But as early as 1924, as we've seen, he asserted his belief that Manhattan would become an exclusive enclave for business, commerce, and entertainment. Although his earliest visionary proposals were probably stimulated by a desire to share in the attention that Corbett and Ferris and others had generated, his interest in the subject grew through the 20s. Like Corbett, he saw the condition of the modern metropolis as the necessity of concentration. And still he observed, and this is his quote, "This does not mean that the man becomes a mechanical robot, the slave to the machine and to society. It merely means that in his workaday hours, the city, or rather the portion of the city where he works, must be planned to be efficient, convenient, and comfortable through his purpose." The urban problems that Hood set out to solve were thus circumscribed. His proposals designed to concentrate population, decongest streets, and maximize density and efficiency. The skyscraper, specifically the tower, was his all-purpose solution. To realize his vision of the rationalized city, Hood stressed the logic of economics rather than the wonders of technology, or the power of the master plan. Applied to Hood, the term visionary pragmatist was no more of a contradiction than the term commercial architecture. So that's what I think about Raymond Hood.